The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more.
Continuing on with the infrastructure bill conversation, FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried weighing in, saying the first thing that crypto had to do here was make sure that Washington was aware there was a provision in the bill that needed clarification. That was successful. Washington is well aware now. And then a following tweet, the goal here, make it clear that centralized U.S. person-facing crypto exchanges have to be filing 1099s, which makes sense. And then kick the can down the road on messier questions. And joining us now from Hong Kong is Sam Bankman-Fried, CEO of crypto exchange FTX, quant trading firm Alameda Research, and co-founder of Project Zero. Welcome to the show, Sam. First off the bat, I want to ask you, how does this bill affect your business, if at all?
Yeah, so, I think it will have implications for FTX US. I think that's pretty clear. And, we'll be filing 1099s. That I think that was clearly coming. That's not a surprise. And, it'll take a little bit of work on our end, but it shouldn't be too hard, all things considered. And so I think on the FTX US end, the impacts are pretty clear. And I think we're sort of already anticipating that was going to happen.
Sam, you gave $5.2 million to Joe Biden's campaign. You're the second highest donor in 2020 besides Mike Bloomberg, who gave about $56 million. You called the White House. Have you picked up the phone? You have Joe's cell number and you say, hey, Joe, what's going on here, man?
Not for a few days. No. In the end, that was, I think that was mostly unrelated from work. And, I think I've sort of made my opinions known here on how I think that this bill should be structured. And I think that it leaves a lot to be desired in its current format. But frankly, I think Biden has a lot going on right now other than, responding to a phone call from me. Yeah,
but nonetheless, I mean, it affects your business. I mean, wouldn't you want to at least use some of the I mean, you're on everyone's radar, and at least in DC. So why not pick up the phone and give a buzz?
Yeah, again,
just asking.
Yeah, and I think I've made my opinion known. I've made sure that people are aware of what I think here. But in the end, this is sort of their decision to make. There are a lot of people from the crypto industry who are consulting on this with legislature, to make sure that people are informed about the issue at hand, and sort of understand. Understand sort of the need for clarification here on especially decentralized applications. But I think in the end, this is sort of, this is just a small piece from most people's perspective of a much larger infrastructure bill. This is a $1 trillion bill compared to a $30 billion, supposedly, piece of it. And, in the end, I think that it looks like the way this is headed is that clarification on this is going to be sacrificed in order to get the bill moving forward.
That makes sense. So, Sam, last time you were on the show, we were talking about your geographic priorities, and you said the U.S. was, your next big destination for global growth. Does this, if this bill passes in its current form, which it seems like it probably will at this point, does that give you pause at all? Does that give you any concern about making the U.S. a strategic priority?
This bill isn't going to affect us in particular that much. I think, again, FTX US is already going to be filing these. That's sort of not much of an update. Now, I think that for, if you're sort of building non-custodial wallet software, I do think that you would be looking for clarity here about exactly who this was meant to apply to. I think, some of the amendments that were proposed would have given that clarity. But I think for us in particular, I don't expect this bill to have large impact. I do think it may have large impact on other parts of the crypto industry, though.
Sam, can you spell out a little bit what this impact is for just the person who's outside of the crypto industry? Because, I feel like we have this divide where you have crypto Twitter being the sky is falling, and then the rest of America being whatever, So can you just spell out why this matters, why Americans should even care, about the effect that this has on the crypto industry?
Yeah, totally. So, there's sort of one piece of this, which is the straightforward piece, which is that if there's Americans trading on a U.S. crypto exchange, then that exchange should, be reporting information to the IRS. That is true of, brokers in the U.S. right now, and that's why this sort of word broker is being employed here in the bill. It's to analogize to what E-Trade would be doing, for instance. But the way this is worded, it would hit anyone. Maybe the worry is that it would hit anyone who plays any part in making any transfer happening in crypto. And that is just really broad. And as an example, one worry is, how about miners? How about blockchain validators, right? Are they getting consideration at gas fees or something, right? Like, are they facilitating a blockchain transfer? Yeah, they could be held to be. And so the worry is that this would actually go to anyone who's involved in DeFi in any way and say, hey, you have to go report all transfers with tax information KYC to the US government. And the thing, though, is that like most of the players in that process, they're like the internet service provider equivalent. Like, they're not the ones with the customer information. They're not the ones running the exchange. Like, they're just sort of transmitting information back and forth in like an impartial way. And they don't even have the information that's required here, let alone a duty to give it. And so they would be like unable to comply with this. And it'd be a really weird group of people to be asking to try and provide information on transactions happening on a blockchain. They know nothing more than what like a third party would know here, because they're not actually the ones who are sort of like doing the trades, or even like hosting an account that does it.
Sam, to that note, my colleague Nick has a question saying that the industry argument is that miners, wallet providers, et cetera, can't be treated as brokers because they don't have the requisite customer KYC information to comply with broker-specific tax information reporting requirements. So is there another tax regulation that makes more sense if the goal here is to both regulate the industry and generate tax revenue?
Totally. And I think the first of all, the straightforward thing to do, I think, would just have the bill saying, look, centralized US facing exchanges have to be collecting this information and passing on to the government. Coinbase, FTX US, Gemini, Kraken, like, just say, first of all, that has to happen. That's clear. That's going to come into effect. And I think that's the first thing that should be passed. I think look, this isn't casting judgment on anyone else in crypto yet. Sort of, we'll deal with that later. And then you start to get to progressively messier questions, right? What if there's an offshore venue that has a U.S. taxpayer on it, right? What's the jurisdiction there? You start to get to like increasingly nuanced questions, and then you can look at, well, how about in DeFi, right? How about a DEX? How about a non-custodial wallet? How about a miner, a validator? How about someone who's trading on a DEX? Like, and I do think that some of these clearly shouldn't be, and other ones are more complicated. And I basically think that there needs to be like a longer conversation there. And many of these are going to have to be drawn, out of this language, so that it doesn't apply to them. Maybe some of those ended up getting included, but that's a different conversation.
The Biden administration seems to think this is already clear. What's a broker? What's a non-broker? If this bill passes as is, do you think? You think it'll be quite messy?
Not clear. Yeah, or I mean, there's going to need to be clarification issued at some point on this. It just isn't clear right now. Now, there might be clarification issued. One thing we're hearing is that Treasury might itself just go out and say, hey guys, we see this thing getting passed, just so you know, here's how we interpret it. Now, I don't know what they're going to say if they say that. And so clarification doesn't need to come through a Senate amendment. There are lots of ways that clarity could come. I don't think it has come yet, though.
Sam, one thing for me personally that I think is missing from this puzzle, I think you articulated really well what the problems are with the bill, but again, it's about communicating this to the wider public, which is going to be necessary in the future if we want to get stuff done. So again, why should the average American care if mining leaves the United States? Why should the average American care if DEXs, can't comply with tax regulations? Like, I feel like if this is not more effectively communicated, these things aren't going to change. So what is the larger argument for people to actually have a stake in this outside of the crypto world?
Yeah, I think there's sort of like two prongs. This one, it just slows down innovation in general, right? People are trying to build technology, and now they're being, kicked out of the country is the worry for that. I'm not saying they would get kicked out, but that the worry is that, the way this ends up getting implemented would be non-practical. And that just like hurts technological development. But the other thing it does is it just, kicks a lot of these industries overseas. And so to the extent they don't shut down, it's just taking them out of the U.S. regulatory regime and maybe into other more hostile regimes towards the states, for that matter, right? And I think that, like, if you sort of said, look, this industry is going to exist in some form, would you like that to be under U.S. jurisdiction or not under U.S. jurisdiction? I think most people in the states would say, yeah, we want jurisdiction over that, and I think that, like, what that means is having to play ball and, come up with like reasonable regulations that take sort of a fair and balanced approach here, which I think some versions of this bill absolutely could. And in fact, many of the amendments I think would have brought it into that category. It looks like it's just getting too messy, frankly. And I don't think that, like, these amendments are dying because they're sort of all deemed like evil or anything like that. Like, it was getting messy. People are having trouble coming to agreement on exactly what phrasing to have, and these ran out of time. And now it's just like time to pass a bill, and, like, there failed to be a consensus before the deadline, and so I guess there's just no amendment. It's sort of how it's looking, which I think means that, like, really the goal here should have been to try to come to an agreement as quickly as possible. Trying just to gum things up here, slow things down, to kill the bad amendments or focus on that. That's how this ends.
Sam, I got to ask, because Bitcoin's above 45,000. So
yeah.
I got to ask you a markets question. We're seeing a lot of movement from one wallet to another. 400 million, 500 million at a clip. Bitcoin's moving from one wallet to another. Volume's still relatively light. You guys took in about 200 or 300 million in Tether over the weekend, and USDC is flying around from one wallet to another as well.
Yep.
So what exactly is going on? Why are we seeing these big movements from wallet to wallet in a market with low volume?
It's a good question, frankly. It is like the price increase is relatively high, given the volumes that we've seen. Now, one thing to take into account here is that it was a weekend. Weekends always have low volume and lower liquidity. And so you will see larger movements per dollar traded on weekends than you will on weekdays. That's part of this equation here, is just the weekend effect. But frankly, if you had, like, put a gun to my head right on Friday and said, here's what's going to play out over the weekend in the Senate, Bitcoin up or down, I certainly would not have said that it's going to be pushing 46,000 at the end of this, right? I would have guessed a lot lower than that. So, whether this is just long planned inflows that happen to happen now, whether there's other information in the market that is unrelated to this and driving some of these moves, whether it's people taking off shorts or whatever, this has certainly, I think, been a surprisingly bullish price movement really continuously over the last week or so.
Is there any one exchange that you would say this is heavily involved in this?
It's not totally clear. So if you look across exchanges, you don't see one exchange with, like, insanely high volume. It's not sort of like you look and you're like, oh boy, that's where it's happening right there. That being said, right. I think FTX, there are a few signs that there's probably net buyers on FTX. I say this without having looked at private data about it at all. So don't take this as a read of what's going on, on the back end or anything, but just looking at things like the premium of the futures, which I think is a really good indicator of this, right? Right now, like, you can see that FTX is trading at, like, a moderately higher premium, not massively, but a little bit higher than other exchanges. There are a few basis points, which tends to sort of point towards net buyers on that venue relative to sellers on others. So, from sort of an outside perspective, that wouldn't surprise me if that were happening. But again, what we haven't seen, you'll sometimes see, like, incredibly strong inflows on one exchange. It'll be very noticeable. We have not seen that. And, you can look at FTX's volume. Maybe it's a little bit higher than average, but not massively so. Like, you certainly aren't seeing, the signs of, like, absolutely massive inflows coming into one venue in particular. This does seem to be substantially more spread out.